Okay, well, it's fair to say that in some sense I'm drained. I'm drained this week. You know the way you'd say you're emotionally drained. I am absolutely emotionally totally drained. And the reason is that I am nearly finished my next book. And it's always last night, I have more edits to do in the next month or 6 weeks, there's no doubt about that. But they're small edits, and there'll be edits that, the copy editor in the publishing house will come back to me and just check grammar and stuff like that. But I'm putting the finishing touches now on the last paragraph at the end of the book. And then next week, say Monday to Thursday, I'll go through it one more time to make sure that it's even and that I didn't kind of, put in something that is not balanced with the paragraph before it or behind it. So basically today I have finished the book, There's no more new emotions will go into it. And that's why I think I'm just emotionally drained, because the past 6 or 7 days have been really, really trying to finish off the emotions. I think that a book is about emotions, to be honest. I remember somebody quoting to me Beethoven. Unusual that it would be Beethoven might say something like this. But he said that every work of art must go from heart to heart. And I thought, that's exactly what it should do. Like, rather than trying to make art an intellectual thing, rather than trying to make art some sort of clever intellectual construct. Sometimes I read a review of a book and I feel excluded because I feel, well, what the reviewer is saying about the book is something so intelligent and so abstract that I don't feel connected with it. I don't feel I want to go and find that book and read it. And always I'm looking for a book that is simply heart to heart. When I get on the stage, I meet the audience. What do I do beforehand? I practice mindfulness. I practice what I call meditation in the Tibetan tradition. I try and bring myself into the present moment so that when I go out onto the stage, I'm not being distracted by what I'm going to say. I'm not being distracted by ideas. I'm not worrying about the agenda or the script that I'm supposed to deliver to the audience. I'm simply in the present moment engaging with the audience and feeling that I'm present in that moment. And that would be, I think, similar what I try and do in the podcast is not so much, I don't plan out from month to month very complicated ideas to share. But what I do is I try and do practices before the podcast that bring me into a sense of attention to the world. And when I come into attention to the world, I feel you're there. I'm drinking a cup of coffee. That's one of the ways I prepare. I always like a cup of coffee. But I do some sort of calm, abiding meditation just before I come into your presence. And even though you're not in the room, I feel your presence. And sometimes when somebody leaves a message, a response to the podcast, I'm able to use that to establish a sense of their presence, your presence, in this room. I've felt this going on now for 4 years. I didn't know where it was going. I didn't plan this, but it seems to me to have gone in a way that gives me enormous satisfaction, because I feel I'm only responding to your presence, and I'm not thinking, I don't have a master plan of what I'm going to say. I got one message during the week. Somebody was saying, give us more stories and less of the religion. I don't think they were saying, we don't want religion. It was like, just give us a few more stories. And I responded to that. So what I'll do in this weekend's podcast, I'll share a couple of stories that I would have put into the columns and that I haven't shared before. These would be recently, like from the past month or so, or 2 months, maybe from May. And the first one, I'm talking about the Camino in Spain again, because, you know, the Camino helped me physically, because I have a problem with the kind of nerve system in the spine as a result of 2 operations. And there's nothing does it more good than walking. And like, regardless of the religious benefit of the Camino, and I don't think the Camino has to be religious. I mean, you can do the Camino, it's just a walk. But I found that just physically, exercise-wise, I could feel it healing me as I was walking. And I felt infinitely better when I came home. And that's a couple of weeks ago now. And in some sense, I feel what's also happened is, you know, I haven't been taking as much exercise since. And I feel the negative effects of that. So that was the first way that the Camino affected me. But the second way was I wanted to write a book about the Camino. Not so much about the Camino itself, but you see, everybody takes somebody with you, I think, in your mind or in your heart when you do the Camino. You walk the Camino and you're thinking about your mother, your father, your daughter, your son. There's somebody in your heart that in the old days you would have said, I'm praying for them. But now what we say is we just have them in our heart, which is another way to say I pray for them. And it's a lovely way to say it, that you hold somebody in your heart. Do you know, I said it to somebody recently who had a bereavement, and I met them. I met them on the street. And I didn't expect to bump into them. And there we were, and I'm looking into the eyes of this person who has lost a loved one recently. And I shook hands, and I said, I'm sorry for your trouble. And he said, yeah, I know. And we went on to talk about other stuff, the weather and the fun and the crack and this, that and the other. You know, he wasn't moping about it now. But I marked it by saying, I'm sorry for your trouble. And then when I was leaving, when I was just going, I held his hand again, and I said, I'll be thinking of you. And he looked into my eyes, and he said, thank you. And I realized as I walked away that in the old days I would have used a phrase like, I'll pray for you. But we don't use that phrase anymore because it seems kind of paternalistic. It's caught up in the jargon of patronizing religious language, you know. You poor fecker, I'll pray for you. So I'll pray for you doesn't work as well as it used to. But funny enough, when I said to him, I'll be thinking of you, it just came out of my mouth. And I know I wasn't talking about it intellectually. You know, I wasn't going to go away driving the car thinking about him like with my head. What I meant was that I was going to keep him in my heart. That I was going to, at some point in the day, feel he was in my heart. And that is prayer. That's our new way of saying, I will pray for you. And I know it is because it's what he did in response that affected me. I might have just blurted it out, but he actually looked me in the eye and said, thank you. And he wasn't thanking me for thinking about him. He was thanking me because he could sense that sometime during the day I was going to sit down and hold him in my heart. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean? What does it mean to hold somebody in your heart? I'm going to try and say what I think about that. First of all, you need to be physically still. And you need to be passive. Now, I'm not going for the phrase mindfulness because it's a bit intellectual in itself. I'll go for the simple idea. Be still and pay attention. So if the school teacher says that to you when you're a child, you know what they mean. Be still and pay attention. Okay, do that with the world around you, wherever you are. I'm sitting at a desk, my Georgian bureau, it's beautiful. The top of it folds out. It's like an organ you'd see in the church. And then there's these drawers, little drawers all over the place. And little cubby holes for putting your notes in and your biros and everything. And then it folds open so that it's one of them leather top desks when it's open. And sometimes when I put my elbows on it, you can hear it creaking. Okay, I pay attention to the world around me, right in front of me. And just above the bureau, there's a red bowl, like for a candle. Gives you a red sanctuary lamp sort of feel to it. And above that, there's an icon. There's an icon of Mary, the Mother of God, and Yeshua. That's a word they're using now for Jesus, and I do like it, I do like it as a kind of variation of the word Jesus, because again, I'll pray for you. It's caught in cliches. But when you say, I'll think about you, you're saying, I will keep you in my heart. And it's the same with the word of Jesus. The word Jesus has been so, if you like, trashed by history, that sometimes, occasionally, it's lovely to just use the word which is more like the original Aramaic that people might have used when he was just with them. Yerusha. Yerusha. It's not Yerusha, it's Yeshua. There's me bell. Forgive me, that was Yerusha is another. I had a friend, a woman one time. She was a deeply religious Christian. Her name was Yerusha. No, Yeshua. And I used it in the book as well, this new book that's coming out in October, because I talk sometimes where the word Jesus comes into the sentence, and then after a paragraph, you're trying to avoid the word Jesus being sort of cliched in people's ears. And I started using Yeshua. And I thought, that really has a beautiful sound to it. So, above me is, just above my writing desk, is the icon of Mary with Yeshua. the baby Jesus, and he's pushing his cheek up to her cheek. It's what they call the icon of tenderness, because it displays the beautiful tenderness of the mother and the child. And then above that, again, funny enough, I have two other icons. One is the Mother of God, which is the Black Madonna. You know, it's connected with Częstochowa in Poland. And on the other side, strangely enough, I have Xenia. And Xenia was a saint in the 19th century. In the Orthodox tradition, she was a woman who was married to a soldier in St. Petersburg, and he was a big general, and she lived a big grand life in St. Petersburg. And then he died. I think he was killed in battle. And she was devastated, and she couldn't cope with the grief, and she sold everything and gave away everything to the poor, which is one of the great sort of, acts of total self-abandonment and charity for which she was recognized as a saint, but also because she used to dress up in his clothes as a man, as an army person, and she would walk around the streets. And eventually she became homeless because she was so wildly generous with the money, and ended up homeless and died on the streets. That's as far as I know the story. And I can see somewhere behind it the human story. Like, can you imagine being devastated so much that you put on the clothes of your bereaved, your beloved, maybe as a way to be close to them? It's a very, very real and powerful thing, an expression of grief. And then there's a connection, I think, it's only my opinion, between her sense of grief almost driving her crazy, so that she ends up destitute. But what the Orthodox Church sees in her is her holiness, her devotion, her prayer life, her generosity to the poor, and her commitment to the poor, because she really then became somebody who was out there on the streets giving to the poor and became famous for it. So to have an icon of her, it's a little icon. I would have bought it in an Orthodox monastery for probably €15 at max. And I like it. I like her. I like the eccentricity of a saint who is almost contemporary and who was, who was so broken in a sense that you can feel the human story of agony and bereavement around her. I think she's really for me the saint of bereavement. I could write the novel, and it would be just a novel of an ordinary woman whose husband is a soldier, he dies, it's a big tragedy, and she ends up on the streets. Be a beautiful and romantic movie. Be like Dr. Zhivago, in the snows of St. Petersburg, and she'd be wandering around in these old rags that used to be her husband's uniform, giving the last few pennies she had to the poor. Very beautiful story. Happened, I think, in about the early 19th century in St. Petersburg. I talk about all these places I've never been, I'd love to go to St. Petersburg. Oh, I'd love to go to Russia. I'd be a bit afraid at the moment, if you know what I mean, with the politics in Russia. And then I suppose with my health as well, when your health is dodgy like mine, you're always getting nervous about going outside the European Union. But I do have a huge admiration for, the Russian church and their spirituality. They seem to me to have a very strong tradition of faith And what they have endured, what Russia has endured, even in the 20th century, particularly in the 20th century, in the face of the Soviet Union, the iron fist of Stalin, the kind of almost like Stalin's regime was almost demonically sadistic. The level at which people were put in prison and tortured and suffered. So I just have a very strong sense of reverence and respect for the Orthodox tradition and also for the icons that now, after I think it must be 6 or 7 years now, I've been using those icons, various icons here in front of me, and they for me are the dynamic, the lens into heaven, the way that I kind of be still and reflect and find that I am living in heaven. Because that's one of the blessings of Christian or Orthodox tradition, is to realize that as you are embodying the Christ in you, so you're walking in heaven, here, in the ordinary. The ordinary, I have the dishes to do from this morning. I still have to wash them up. I have the water on to heat it up and then do the dishes. It's a funny thing to say that when I'm doing them dishes, I'm in heaven. But that's what you get out of meditation. That's what you get, the sense of a meditative attention to what's around you. And you realize that consciousness is bliss in itself. That you are already fully, completely enlightened in the presence of Christ, with Christ, in Christ, through Christ. All the ways you want to put this is like, I mean, what is Christ? Christ is Jesus, Yeshua, transformed, risen from the dead, in the sense that the boundary of death that surrounds every single one of us as individuals is transcended. He broke through. He is lifted up and transformed out of the ordinary. And if he be there in a glorified way, then all of us belong to that ground of being. It's like that's the gift to us. Awaken to that idea that we walk in the light. Even though we're in darkness, even though there are shadows around us, we are walking in heaven. And then that's how somebody like Xenia comes to me as a wonderful story, a wonderful personage, a wonderful saint. When I measured the grief that she had, the loneliness, the desperation, which must have been absolutely huge if it sent her out into the snow with rags of clothes on her in a demented fashion to spend her life giving to the poor. And yet underneath that grief, her faith endured, and her faith was manifest, and she was seen to be a woman of faith, even in her grief. So this is an amazing thing about the Christ story and tradition, that we are lifted up to this sense of joy and bliss walking in heaven, even as we're walking the street, even as we're down and in grief and in loneliness. If we pay attention, we see a split-level reality. We see the surface of things as they are. I see the mahogany of the desk I'm sitting at. I see the icon of tenderness above me just on the shelf. I see the Xenia icon above that on the other shelf. I see these things, I pay attention to them. And as I become aware of them, right, being passive in myself, bringing the body to stillness by using breathing exercises or just sitting still with a straight back or whatever, but I become aware that there is this presence. Not in the surface of the icon, but in the depth of the icon. Beyond the icon, and yet like a luminosity. Do you know like a luminosity? There's a light in everything. Otherwise I couldn't see it. The room is imbued with light. There's light behind me coming in from the window, coming in from the summer sun. It's behind the clouds at the moment, but it's still the light of the summer sun, and it's coming in the window at a particular angle, and it's hitting the screen of the laptop that's in front of me. There's light everywhere. And sometimes when you're meditating, you're falling into that light. You're beginning to sense your body even at the surface, and yet a depth of consciousness in it, almost like a luminosity, almost like a light. This is a wonderful experience. I think this is the great gift that the Christian tradition gives us. And it's so amazing that sometimes I think Christian teachers are afraid to actually articulate it fully. They're afraid to say how wonderful Christianity is. They're afraid to say how magnificent it is. So when I'm paying attention like that, I'm not just being mindful in a room on my own, and I'm not just sort of watching a flow of various thoughts and disturbing emotions in my own mind, as if in some sense it was all happening in my own mind. Because if I think like that, if I meditate like that, I am still contained within my mind. I'm still using the idea of individuality, me as a person. I'm using it as the subject, the totality of what I'm investigating. But when I use an icon, when I begin to experience the icon as lens, when I begin to feel the sense of the nature of reality is bigger than me and coming towards me, it's like I'm not the center, I'm only peripheral to the center. And the center in Christian terms we say is Christ. I could say Buddha. But it's the core awakening that you will feel when you are still, even for a moment. You don't even have to be praying. You can just walking along in a beautiful woodland and see a beautiful bird or a beautiful tree. And your consciousness loses attachment to your ego and to yourself, and it becomes absorbed with the bird in front of you. I don't argue anymore with my clock. When it goes off like that during a podcast, I give it the space because that too is calling me into attention. Pay attention to the world. That's what the clock is saying every 15 minutes. Be mindful. So when I'm looking and I'm paying attention, I'm seeing not just the surface of the world, but I'm experiencing a luminosity. And the Christian metaphor is about a love relationship between me and that other stuff. So I'm sitting here in my room at a surface level. There's a desk in front of me. There's an icon up on the shelf. There's a clock in the corner. That's at the surface. And yet I'm paying attention to the fact that everything around me is imbued with luminosity. That actually is the Christ loving me. You might say that's a really crazy thing to say. This is the Christ loving me. My desk, my computer, the clock on the wall, this is Christ? Yeah. Because it's all the one single luminosity. Outside time, eternally penetrating time. And I belong in it. It's not that I'm an individual thinking about it. It's like it's in me. It's the same luminosity that's allowing me to be still. In the old days, they used to say, I cannot pray unless God prays in me. And it's like saying that in scientific terms, somebody said one time, the electron is not neutral. The electron has an attachment to the proton or the neutron. It has an entanglement. And the one single entanglement is what composes the universe, the cosmos, as a coherent moment in time. This moment in time at the surface level is a material reality, and yet it is like a kind of a commitment, a refined tuning and rhythm or pulse that says from one second to the next, here we are, entangled. So even you think about the whole cosmos like that, entangled with this energy or luminosity that holds it together. I'm having that experience looking at the clock on the wall. Everything around me. If I'm doing the dishes later on, I'm pouring the water, I'm making sure that the grease is coming off the plate. I'm still dealing with the mystery of conscious being. And I'm still dealing with the idea that, or the feeling, that this luminosity that's in everything is beyond me. So I didn't originate anything like this. And if I didn't originate who I am, then I am loved. I awaken in love. I mean, think about how you live life. You just live life with other people. You live your life for your children, for your parents, for your beloved. And if you're absolutely alone and have lost people, and let's say you have an animal in the house, you can have as real a relationship with that animal. You live in love for that animal, with that animal. A cat, a dog. We just live in relationship. So when we awaken through some sort of meditation, I would call it meditation. I would call it calm abiding. I would call it paying attention. And when we do that, it's like being in love. There's no other word for it. There's no other way to explain it. It's like being in love. And I say this because you know it. This is something you know as much as me, maybe more than me. And this is something that is like, you know, when you are still. And by stillness, I don't mean any particular form of meditation. I mean any way you do it, with your rosary beads in front of the Blessed Sacrament, walking on the beach, walking in the woods, washing the dishes. This happens anywhere and everywhere. And you feel loved when you pay attention. When I pay attention to the icon, when I pay attention to the red lamp, when I pay attention to the clock, these are all external, but I actually also pay attention to my own body. So my breath, my sight, my sensations, everything is also part of the cosmos that I'm becoming aware of. And ultimately, the great icon in this is your own heart. Your own heart. If you get to this state, you're already in heaven. You found joy. And the only metaphor we use that works, that is sufficient, is to say, my heart loves you. And we say that you can bring your mind, your conscious, rational mind, down into your heart. That's a phrase they use in the old Orthodox tradition, They say, bring your mind, bring it down into the heart. And you'd see them making a sign, pointing at their head, their forehead, and then pointing down at their chest. So bring it down into the heart. This is where, in a sense, Christianity becomes very sensate, very sensual, very physical. And, we think about Eastern and Asian philosophy and meditative techniques like yoga as being unique and different to what we have in the Christian tradition. But I have to tell you that in my experience, when I started opening the books on the old monks and sisters, nuns, mystics of the 13th century back to the 3rd century, that whole millennium, 1,000 years of sort of great mystical tradition in Europe and in the north of Africa, when I look at that, I realize that Christian meditation is just as physical as yoga. It's just as physical as Tibetan mindfulness. Being still with the Christ is like being physically still and paying attention to all the material reality around you and beginning to experience the luminosity within reality and beginning to experience the sense of relationship that makes up who you are. I am not an individual. I am in love. And most importantly, I am being loved. I am being loved. It doesn't even matter if people reject you, like the people you work with or your neighbours or even people in your family, even if you feel rejected by people in your family. So if you're dependent on love and somebody rejects you, then you're lost. You'll go crazy with anger and rage and jealousy. But if you be still, as somebody said in the Old Testament, in the Torah, be still and know that I am God. See, this voice comes to us all the time, everywhere. There's no place that you cannot be still. And if you're still in that space, you will know God's presence. And the consequence of that is you will realize that you are created by God, because you didn't create yourself. If there's something behind the curtain and you discover what's behind the curtain, well, you know that you didn't put it there because it wasn't yours to put there. It's something else. This sense of otherness in God, what people used to call transcendence. That that God is a root that comes from elsewhere and not just grows through us and in us, but actually we are the flowering of the root. We are the plant. We are the incarnation of God. That's what Yeshua was saying. Okay, so I'm here in my little studio and I'm paying attention to everything around me and I'm being still and I'm experiencing this sense of joy and wonder. Now my heart is in right relationship. You know, like there is now no sourness in me. There might have been sourness in me when I opened my eyes this morning in the bed. There might have been sourness in me when I was listening to the news on the radio and thinking about who won the elections in Britain and who lost and this, that and the other. There might be many reasons why I'd be sour. But when I do this discipline, all the sourness dissolves. It is scattered by this experience of just being. Because the experience of being feels like relational, feels like beneath the surface of everything is the one light that is inside me. I am being loved. I'm being embraced. There's the great Jewish philosopher of the 20th century, Martin Buber. He says, you will experience the reality around you, the environment around you, not as it, but thou. Thou. Be alone in a room, be alone at the sea, be alone on the mountain, be alone in the woods, and you will experience that which is around you as a unus. You know, it's not an it. It's like a presence that's with you all the time. And that presence is with you all the time, even if you're bereaved. No matter how broken you are. Even if you're on the streets of St. Petersburg, demented, throwing away the money, walking around in your beloved's clothes, you know that in the presence around you, in the pain even, you're loved. You're loved by God. And that's the kind of relationship, that's the kind of explosion that happens, I think, when you meditate in a way that engages with religious icons. And I speak about the Christian narrative story and icons because for me they are the only route. It doesn't mean that some other tradition, Judaism, Hindu, Islam, Buddhist, it doesn't mean that others are wrong or lesser. It means that the kind of special nature of Christianity and the wonders of it are special for me. And it's not that Christianity is a gift, it's that Christianity allows you to understand the gift. The gift is far bigger. God, if you want to use the word God, God is not a Catholic, God is not a Christian. God is simply this word we use to try and make sense of the transcendent mystery of being. And it follows an instinct that all being is about love. We're going to hit 12 o'clock. I'm going to be silent for the 12 bells. I'm thinking it's a moment to pay attention. If you can associate something like a chime as a call to prayer. Clearly, we all know this from Islam, where 5 times a day there's a call to prayer. It also happens in Buddhist temples and Zen temples and in Christian monasteries. The bell in the Christian monastery will go before dawn and at dawn and at mid-morning and at noon and many times during the day and in the evening at the end to finally call in what used to be called solemn silence. That after that final bell there was silence. And why all the silence? Simply to allow the monk to pay attention. No matter what the mediocre, ordinary, mundane thing he or she was doing. Dusting a few shelves. Cleaning a few dishes like I'll do in a few minutes or half an hour. These mundane things we do are the surface of God's presence, and it's like amazing. Okay, I'll finish off quickly, but no, I won't. I'll finish off slowly. Here is the beautiful thing. When I met the guy he was bereaved. I shook hands and then I said to him, I'll be thinking about you. And I knew the way he gripped my hand and the way he said thank you, that he understood me to be saying, I will keep you in my heart. And this is where it fits in, you see. In the meditational moment where you're paying attention to all the furniture in the room, all the sounds in the room, all the thoughts in your head, all the emotions, all the breathing in your body, all the discomfort and comfort in your body, every sensation, you're feeling your way into that moment of presence. And there are certain things you select, like let's say the icon. You focus on an icon. It's a selective thing you're doing. And then in that moment you focus on some particular person. Like the guy that I met who was bereaved and I focus him there. I feel his presence. That's what it means when you say that you keep somebody in your heart. Because you're using your heart already as an icon. You know, you're experiencing reality as bigger than just you, the individual. You're experiencing a sense of God's presence around you and in you and through you. And in that moment, if you say, well, I'm now thinking about my daughter, my son, my father, my mother, or this guy I met on the street who's bereaved, I'm bringing them into that lens. I'm bringing them into that heart. It's like I'm now the icon. Here's an idea. Let me just give you this in terms of a Buddhist idea, and I'll translate it into a Christian language. In Buddhism, there are many, many practices where you visualize the Buddha in front of you, on the lotus, on a moon seat, hands joined in a meditation mudra, calm and serene, quiet and elegant, floating on fluffy white clouds. You have this sense of the Buddha before you, okay? And then sometimes there are many, many practices where you visualize somebody that you know, maybe somebody that you love, maybe somebody that you don't like, maybe somebody that you don't get on with, and you visualize them. Sometimes you visualize the person with the the light of the Buddha coming out of the heart of the Buddha like a tube of white light and hitting the other person in the crown of their head and flowing down into their body and illuminating them with full light, every limb of their body. Sometimes you do it with yourself. Sometimes there are Buddhist practices like Tara, white Tara practice. You can look that up. White Tara practice is very much, there is this moment where you visualize the energy of this Buddha of compassion, and it's coming through white light from the heart of the Buddha into you and down, through the crown chakra and filling your whole body with light. So it's a visualization. It's a visualization exercise that people would do in the Buddhist tradition, and very, very beautiful. But the visualization is very powerful. It has just as much effect on your consciousness as intellectual ideas. We in the West tend to shuffle ideas intellectually around the place, whereas in Asia, in their devotional prayer life, they use these beautiful visualizations. I find it very interesting if you use that kind of visualization with Western tradition, so that instead of the Buddha, you may be thinking of the Christ or the Mother of God. But you can visualize the good energy, the compassionate energy, the loving energy of your mentor deity, channeling light into your body in the same way as the practice would be done in any Buddhist tradition. And then when it comes to how your energy spreads out to other people, there are many, many Buddhist practices where people visualize light within themselves. So it's like you see this light coming from the mentor deity, from the Buddha, sitting in a lotus position, and there's this light comes into you, and then it kind of bounces from your heart and goes out from your heart in what they say is the 10 directions. Be like 360 degrees all around you. This light is emanating, going out like arrows of light. And you visualize that light going out from you and reaching into all the people who are around you, the people that you love, the people that you don't know, and the people that you don't like. So you're doing a visualization whereby you're physically sending out love in the form of white light and nectar to all the people around you, including people you don't like. And that too is a very powerful practice. And so again, in Christian terms, it is possible to experience a very strong sensation if you are meditating on the Christ or the Mother of God, and you experience this sense, you're visualizing it, an energy, a light, a love, a compassion radiating from them into your heart. Okay, that's part one, but then part two is that you experience yourself radiating a love, a compassion, a forgiveness, physically like a white light coming out of your heart to the people maybe who have offended you and you want to forgive. So you're creating a narrative, a visual narrative, for what really is the transformation of your heart in forgiveness, and the kind of aspiration that that forgiveness melts the heart of the enemy. I have to say, I think it does. I have to say that one of the biggest things I have a conviction about in life is don't put coal on the fire. That's the Buddha principle. So that every dynamic is like a fire. And when you're pushing your argument, when you're angry, when you're saying some nasty word to somebody, you're just putting coal on the fire. Let it go out. That's my best description of non-violence. Non-violence is not anything about, standing in protests shouting against war. Non-violence is from the heart. And it's just blocking anything negative emanating from you. So that can be done very beautifully in these visualizations. The sense of the power of compassion we get from the lens, the icon, the presence of Christ or Mary in our meditation. And then the second part of it being that dynamic within myself, where I generate a light that goes out from me towards my enemy, towards a stranger, with nothing but love and compassion. And then when I meet somebody on the street and I shake their hand and I say, I'll be thinking about you. What it really means is that in these moments of meditation, I will call to mind that person and feel that in some way I'm present to them and they're present to me, and I'm sending out love and compassion towards their pain. And in the old days, we used to say, I'll pray for you. Archaic words, perhaps, but the reality behind it is the same. And it's such a powerful way to build a sense of, just being at ease with people. When you pray for somebody in that sense, when you think about them in your heart, with your heart, when you send out an energy of love to somebody else from your heart, you can't have an argument with them. It's impossible. It's psychologically impossible. You feel no defensiveness. And this is a big secret, but that's how I'm able to be relaxed on stage without any script to worry about. Because I'm standing in front of maybe 300 people, but I'm doing it as if it was one person that loved me unconditionally. So why wouldn't I be smiling? And what would I be cross about? And what would I be afraid of? And there you go. I wanted to say in this that when I bring people to mind, I really feel them present. And I feel them present in a way that you're present to me now, and I'm sending out to you this good energy. This good energy from my heart to you. And that's going to do me good. I'm going to feel much better when I'm washing the dishes in 10 minutes' time. Because it's like you're not in this room physically right now the same way as my computer is sitting on the desk. But I know that you're here. I know that that dynamic of love transcends time. And I know that in that sense, I'm genuinely sending in this moment love and compassion to you. And as I said, that does me good. I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to say that. And I wanted to say that even though we see phrases like, I'll pray for you, falling into disrepute and beginning to sound like they're patronizing and old-fashioned, the truth is that everything in the power of religious faith is as solid and strong as it ever was. It's just that sometimes the language is in transformation. I also wanted to say that I recognize when I'm asked to do a few stories, I do them. And it's time to do some stories. Not the Christian thing, not the religious thing, but I had to do this particular podcast because I'm so relaxed and high and emotionally exhausted because I've just finished a book. So next week, please God, I will do 3 or 4 stories, pieces out of columns, and reflect on them. And until then, I hope you stay well and safe and are at peace. And thank you for being here. Bye-bye.